All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. Today, we have a wonderful interview with Mark Jenkins, a disability advocate out of Manchester, New Hampshire. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of really cool stuff related to getting the conversation started about how do we include the whole community and all sectors of community into emergency management. Let's get at her. Mark, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Jeff. This is really exciting. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Mark Jenkins. I am the executive director of a New Hampshire 501c3 nonprofit organization called the Whole Community Alliance for Disability Equity. What we are all about is to make sure that the disability community gets in front of everybody that is involved in the emergency management community so that plans can be made prior to a crisis, and we can help all of our friends, neighbors, relatives to get out, to make sure that they have what they need, to get the people involved so that the shelters can be appropriately set up and staffed, to make sure that we can get everyone into the same level playing field so that the outcome after the crisis winds down is just as good for everyone in every community, the disability community, the non-disabled community, so that we can all get through it together.
And I think there's been a lot of work on the equitability, and I always mess around that word, of outcomes in disasters, and we know that due to the very nature of life, vulnerable and marginalized populations do draw a disproportionate on a per capita basis amount of resources during an emergency, and rightfully so, and there's no question there. But from your perspective, being inside on the advocacy side, for those populations, how would you characterize the greatest barrier to you getting, for all intents and purposes, a seat at the table and a voice in the conversations?
The biggest barriers that I've come up against so far, surprisingly, have not been political or legislative. They've been in the realm of what has happened over the last bunch of years since the pandemic, where everybody agrees that this needs to be done. It is on their to-do list to sit down with as many people as possible, but they don't have either the time, the funds, the personnel, so that they can start setting up meetings, so that they can spearhead all kinds of community outreach programs, so we can find people where they're at and discuss with them what they're going to need. Because just like everybody else in the community, the disabled community has just as many differences, different requirements as you'll see in the quote unquote regular world.
And so it sounds a lot like the awareness is there at the decision maker level. They understand that there's a need for participation, and they probably likely, and what I've come across in my experiences is they're not only aware of the need for participation, but they're aware of the individual needs and the differentiating needs from the disabled population. The question, it kind of gets back to it's a question of resources, and a difficulty and challenge of resources comes up. And I recently wrote a piece about the question about resources is we have a lot of draws. So in your idea, how do we get the disabled voice in places where the economically challenged voice was successful? There are some programs designed specifically for economic relief related to income levels in disasters that have been successful. So that advocacy group was successful in getting to the table and getting resources. What do you think the barrier is to moving that conversation beyond I'm aware to let's start talking about allocation of resources.
Well, therein actually lies the problem because the initial allocation of resources is not tremendous. With the thankfully, one of the good things that came out of the pandemic is that everybody can Zoom now. And you have many members of the disability community who are just as happy to get onto a Zoom call with 50 or 60 other people and talk about it. And the emergency management directors here in New Hampshire that I've spoken with, members of Health and Human Services at the state level, they all agree that we want to sit down, but we don't know who to talk to. So what we've done is to start building an alliance of everyone from Able New Hampshire and New Hampshire Family Voices. And I'm going to be speaking with the United Way in a couple of days. To everybody at the Cerebral Palsy Association, the Disability Caucus at the state level. So getting those initial meetings is going to lead us to find out exactly what the people in the community are going to need.
Mhm.
The resources I am finding, the resources in the individual cities and towns are pretty well set. They know about what they're going to need, but nobody knows where to stage these resources. You could have them on the wrong side of town. You
Mhm.
could have, you may only need, in a small town, you may only need 50 oxygen tanks, where the next town over is going to need 250, but they've only ordered, 20 or 30. So it's getting those people together so that they can start those initial conversations and then figure out if we are going to either need more resources, whether that's financial or equipment. And once we can figure out how much and of what type, then we can start working on new allocations if need be. For the moment, what we're advocating for is to get everybody together. We're hoping that that's going to start hopefully in the next couple of weeks. I have a call out to the head of the Regional Public Health Network here in New Hampshire, who's supposed to have a yearly kickoff meeting in the next couple of weeks that she's going to have us in. So that will get us into most of the emergency management directors in the state, of which there's 250 odd. So that should at least make some sort of an inroad to be able to get everyone uh, on the same page, and they generally feel that they are. As I said, they want to. Everyone that I have spoken to said this is a wonderful idea. We don't have the people. If you want to spearhead it, you go right ahead. That's fine. And
Yeah.
then it comes down to, somebody should do something about that. And we decided that we're going to be somebody and we're going to do something about that.
And that's a strong part of the advocacy, and it's not just in the disability. I mean, you provide a perfect example of the importance for the community or the community of practice in the disabled area and the community at large
Hmm.
to be together and to be able to speak to a common voice. So when somebody says, I need to speak to the advocacy for the disabled population in Manchester, uh, who do I speak to? And that should
Right.
be a well-known social connection between the local and emergency manager and the voice of the disabled community in their area of responsibility and who that is. And sometimes it's a conversation of you've got two people equally interested in being part of this conversation and they don't
Hmm.
know each other exists, or if they do, they don't have a positive relationship in the community and build these
Right.
social network ties. And there are a couple of
Right.
examples in Canada of communities that did something along that lines, and it took a number of years to get all of the parties interested and to get all of the groups together and to get
Yes.
that synergy, to create that quarterly meeting where you'll want to go to, where you're going to carve the time out of your calendar because you see the value in advocating for your interest in the community. And the emergency manager says, you know what? When I spend an hour with Mark and his team, I get such incredible value and information out of that that it makes my job so much easier. So, yeah, absolutely. I'm going to carve that hour out. But it's
Right.
like you said, it's those initial setups, it's those initial, as I used to say, it grip and grins, those initial, hi, how are you?
Yeah.
This is who I am. And this
Right.
is who I advocate for, that somebody has to step up and be the champion. And I think your organization, as representative of a number of them, is the key to that. Because, like you said, the emergency managers, and we talked about this before, is an emergency manager often is one or one of 1.5. If you're
Hmm.
fortunate enough in your town to actually have a paid full-time position, it's more than
Correct.
likely off the corner of the desk of the fire chief. They don't have the time in a week to be
Correct.
meeting with a whole slew of organizations to talk about planning. So it's about saying, okay, if we're going to grab an hour from the community, from our emergency management folks, how can we best utilize that? Who are our own voices? Now,
Right.
a follow on question for that is, how well connected or how important do you think it is connected to you to be connected to other areas and other advocacy groups within the community who don't speak for the disabled but speak for their own populations, kind of representing a common voice in the community?
Absolutely. And that's one of the reach outs that we've been doing to the LGBTQ community, who are, as we see, under attack all over the place. As we down here in America, anyway, I can't speak for Canada, but there is a large elderly population that we're going to be working with to make sure that their outcomes are good. But one of the reasons we called the organization the whole community is the impetus, the start of the whole thing was the disability community, but we quickly realizing that that is the main thrust, but it's not just the
Yeah.
disability community. What we're doing is going to help the entire community because in this particular aspect, we can't really siphon out just one particular group and silo them over to the side while everybody else has their own thing going on. As you mentioned, there are so many different advocacy groups here in New Hampshire that don't know that the other exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is, the grip and grin, as you called it, is, look, we're here, we're putting this together. We want you to come along too.
Yeah.
We know that you're there. Now you know that we're here, and we know that it's going to be for the long haul. So we're going to keep going and bring as many people together, and if they find that some of it's redundant, that's okay. I'm not looking to reinvent the wheel. If someone has an idea for this, for different aspects of it already, then we're perfectly happy to dovetail that into what we're doing to make sure that it works for everyone. One of the women that we are working with has an organization over on the seacoast in Portsmouth where she brings your team together. Most people with a disability are going to have a team of medical professionals, whether
Yeah.
that's strict, your PCP and your surgeon, or your pulmonologist, your physical therapist, your occupational therapist, someone at Medicaid or Medicare who's going to be helping you. The Social Security Administration, may be involved. So her role is creating your team, getting your team together because we're finding that none of these people talk. And so, while she's got that going on, now they've got their whole team that we can bring in, as an advocate for, a certain people, and it works to connect everybody from the ground level up.
And that's and a lot of that is different when you look across you'll have a lot of medical cases like that that have a number of medical team members, and then you'll have one
Hmm.
person who's the case coordinator or care coordinator, depending. They wear different titles. Sometimes they're practical nurses, sometimes they're nurses, and sometimes they actually manage 40 cases. And when you
Right.
get to be able to tap to somebody like that who deals with all of the different possible situations daily, and
Right.
they can surmise and say, hey, this is kind of like this is the major issue that we're facing, right?
Right.
Because
Yes.
part of the problem that we face when we're trying to put these community councils together, and I've called them community preparedness councils, community response councils. There's lots of different names around them, but basically that table is
Sure.
you have issue fatigue. You have everybody has an important issue that to their advocacy group is their number one idea. But when you're sitting
Yes.
around a table with 30 voices that you successfully got together in a Zoom call, however, everybody's interested. You don't have time to deal with 30 different issues, and you start getting into issue fatigue where what we're trying to do is help everybody. But one of the ideas that came along, and I'd love your opinion on this, is somebody else had mentioned that what we need to try to do is to find out the one issue that will help the most to the greatest degree and get that one across the finish line to demonstrate the value of the council and people getting together, and then demonstrating the coordination with the city. And that, for example,
Hmm.
my issue may not be the one, right?
Right.
I
Right.
have to understand that somebody else's issue in the community is going to potentially have a greater impact if it's solved first. And
Yes.
kind of, and I don't like to say prioritizing because that kind of puts your life as better, more important than mine type of deal, but that if we're going to tackle the 40 issues that face our community,
Hmm.
which one do we tackle first? And have you seen that kind of assessment where people are able to have that type of conversation and look reflectively and honestly at that?
Not yet. No. What I have seen a lot of what you're talking about, where there are so many different ideas, that prioritizing them is extremely difficult. And who can say that my problem is better than, more important than your problem? What we need to do once we start getting to the state level. Now, getting when we're at the local town and city level, there's going to be a lot that can be done that we need to convince the emergency management directors that they can do that does not require additional funding. And some of that is just reorganizing, shifting resources to different places. However, when we get to the state level where we're talking to the entire regional public health network, and we have 30 different people from the disability community with 30 different issues, we're going to have to try to come up with as many not truncated ideas, but group them together, and see where we can get. There will be lots that will be going on, but some issues are going to ring more loudly with the powers that be at the state level, who will be making decisions on passing bills and allocating funds. And not just do we retrofit all of our corners to have the blind bumps, at the corner and a ramp
Yeah.
so that you can get down. There may be, some things that are not going to require any other changes other than shifting resources. But that needs to be a conversation with everybody, and then break it out into working groups. There will be, because of the amount of differences in the disability community, there are going to be different requirements. There are different requirements at a shelter if you are blind or if you have cerebral palsy. There's different resources that are going to be needed if there's a fire in your building, and you're not ambulatory. A train comes off the tracks and we need to get everybody in this neighborhood out. Do we know who they are and where they are? So there's a certain amount of prioritizing that needs to go on, but how those priorities get chosen is, I don't want to say it's going to be a lottery, anybody's guess. Yeah, but it's going, we have to try to do all of it at the same time and see what floats.
And there's also
Why?
going to be some low hanging fruit that are easily to
Yes.
solve. Like you
Yeah.
said, retrofitting something that's easy to retrofit,
Right.
that's available in surge money or for different levels of government, and it's not going to look the same in each area. Like the priority
No.
for the blind community is not necessarily going to be the same in the rural and the urban environment. There's not necessarily going to be the same. One of the interesting things that I'd love to hear your thoughts on is a couple of pieces that been reading that have been online lately is talking about the dependency on the government and
Hmm.
the fact that you know welcome to the age of fiscal restraint in some areas of government and not in other areas of government. But
Some,
I know
yeah.
in general, emergency management and its requirements is probably not going to receive a significant additional amount of funding from any levels of government. It's just
Right.
it's not popular to mitigate against a disaster that may never happen. But it's great, politicians don't get elected because they fail for their mitigation plans, but they certainly get
Right.
voted out for their response efforts. That being
Yes.
said, there's a lot more and I'm part of the movement that advocates for should we be shifting some of the responsibility to build this capacity to assist the disabled community to the community from the government? Because the government has a limited capacity, irrespective of the
Hmm.
need, to deal with what the issues that exist in the community. They just run out of time and space.
Right.
Is it possible to take an organization like yours to
Hmm.
take on not only on the responsibility or sorry, on the advocacy, which you do a wonderful job of in advocating for the needs, but also take on the responsibility to deliver, vice
Oh,
advocating and then expecting the government to deliver on everything? Where does the
right.
community fall into that delivery?
Well, I think the community is the entire basis for everything that we're going to be doing. Every single disabled person is going to have their own community, not just the team of medical professionals that I was talking about, but you're going to have family members. Mom, dad, brothers, sisters, cousins. There are lots of people around, your neighbors and such. So getting everybody involved is going to be priority number one, because there's nobody that can make it all by themselves. It does have to be an entire community effort. And unfortunately, a lot of us today don't know who is in our community. So it's going to be incumbent upon groups like ours to not just get out to the state and local first responders and the emergency management people and the people at Health and Human Services at the state level and the politicians, but we're also going to need to be out in the community,
Yeah.
advocating for the community to help their community. One of the groups that we've gotten on board is the New Hampshire Council of Churches, and they are more than willing. I did not realize that this was really as big an issue as it is, but their constituencies, the people that show up on Sundays, are more than happy to join in and see what they can do their own outreach. Everyone knows someone who has a disability,
Yeah.
how do I help my neighbor? Is somebody going to check on cousin Billy? So it is going to be incumbent upon us to make that ground level advocacy work throughout the community and not just with first responders. If something really bad happens, like we've seen in California, like we saw in North Carolina, down in New Orleans, I'd pick a state. Everybody's had something going on.
Exactly. Of lately,
You know,
yeah.
yeah, we had floods last year and the year before here in New Hampshire, and the year before that we had major freezes that locked entire sections of the state down. So we've got to be able to get the message out to go help your neighbor. And in a lot of rural communities, that happens without any question whatsoever. Everybody knows this, that we're going to jump in and help. But do you know who to help and where to go? And so it's going to take getting the entire community together as a group to
And
work together for everybody's common good.
well, exactly. And one example that I use all the time is during the early parts of the pandemic when nobody really understood what was truly happening and the government
Hmm.
was consistently changing rules. I interviewed an outreach group for homeless youth that existed in
Hmm.
one small rural region of Ontario, and what they would provide, they'd provide a space, no names required. Come in, grab a sandwich. There was a shower stall. Do what you needed to do. Use the washroom. Out you go. We're here to have a
Hmm.
chat if you want to. We can connect you to services, or we won't say a word to you. Just come in. Do that.
Right.
Pandemic comes along. Restrictions are okay for contact tracing. Everybody has to give their name at the front door. Well, a good portion of their people just started making up names because they had no interest in providing their real name. They didn't want a record of them being anywhere. Of course, that
Right.
wasn't good. Some type of identification had to be necessary. Well, how many homeless folks walk around with a wallet full of identification on them? And then they said, you can't allow people to shower and you can't serve food in the same facility. So what was happening is out of the best of interest, the municipality was imposing a series of public health rules that was imploding and impeding on the ability of the community organization to assist the members of the community. They said, here's a laundry list of PPE you have to have to serve the community. And oh, no, we're not going to give you the PPE. We're just going to tell you that you have to wear it. And of course, as per most nonprofits, as you know, working in the nonprofit support disability, you don't have a
Hmm.
large cash flow and a large
Right.
checking account with money.
Right.
What happened is through hook or by crook, as my grandmother used to say, they ran into somebody from a local business who found out that this was the situation ongoing. And the answer was simply tell us what you need and we will deliver it. And throughout the pandemic, all of the PPE requirements were delivered, no questions and no charge, by the local business community to this community outreach. But this was the first time the two groups had actually ever interacted and knew each other existed.
Hmm.
So, one of the areas, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, one of the areas that we often don't bring into the conversation when we talk about the disabled community is the Chamber of Commerce, which represents the businesses that are in the small towns, of which
Hmm.
the disabled population are customers, same as every other customer that
Right.
expend their funds in the community. And
Hmm.
corporations want to donate and support the community. They want the community to be healthy. From a simple capitalistic perspective, they don't do well when the community doesn't do well. So a healthy community equates to a healthy business. How well have you seen efforts to engage corporate America into the conversation about disability advocacy in emergency management?
Oh, from what I have seen, and I cannot speak for every thing or every aspect. From what I have seen, it's nil.
Okay.
Everyone that I have spoken to is all by themselves. There are some groups that do get funding um, by some of the philanthropic corporations that are out there,
Yeah.
that are trying to do a good job. But in the main, unless you get into someone like Coca-Cola, it's somebody that large, where they may be putting money into something. so that they can put their name on it, then a lot of times those businesses, I'm not sure if they're approached, if they're not approached, and they say no. I don't know. I have not approached them yet. So from my perspective, I cannot say, but I've not seen any in any of the conversations that I've had. When we were getting the nonprofit up and going, talking with people at different founding organizations, there wasn't anybody saying, well, you should go over and talk to, such and such large insurance agency, or go talk to Progressive or somebody, and go talk to the big business downtown because they love doing this stuff. Everybody is really looking for funding from either the state government, the federal government, or places like the United Way or some of the small
Yeah.
seeding foundations. And actually, the United Way does a lot of sponsoring of a great portion of the emergency management directors here in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Technically, they're employees of the United Way, but they're an emergency management director for an entire region of the state. So the Chamber of Commerce and individual businesses has not been approached yet, from my knowledge.
And and part of the avenue is not just for fundraising because businesses are approached by everything from little league
Right,
softball teams to minor hockey teams.
right.
Part of the discussion is just like you're building an advocacy council for all of
Hmm.
the disparate voices in the disability community. The
Hmm.
Chamber of Commerce does the same function in the community for all of the small and medium businesses. So
Right,
in fact, what I've been trying to persuade communities is this is far more about the persuasion and influence and getting the Chamber of Commerce on your advocacy, on supporting you, than it is looking for a check. Because if you look
right.
for a check, line up like everybody else. But when you approach
Exactly.
the
Right,
Chamber of Commerce about saying, "Hey, you have the reach to 45% of the working, employees in the area. You have an ear to government that I have yet to successfully secure. You can get an appointment with a phone call. I have to barrage people with emails before they know I'm there." Right? So it's more of
right,
a how do I bring the Chamber of Commerce as a voice of the corporate community on my advocacy team to help me get to that table, to help me get that seat at the table, because you'll want the as many different voices as you can supporting your idea in New Hampshire to get it going, just like a lot of other organizations are starting to get the information for it, to get the ear and say, hey, the local municipality isn't magically going to get extra millions of dollars, but to
right,
come forward and say, based upon all of these sectors of society, here's a different way we think you should consider allocating the resources you do have. Here's how we think your $500,000 budget would be better, would be more effective to help more people if you did it the following way. And part of the issue is that what we have, and your situation is no different, is a bunch of very smart, well-intended individuals all speaking individually instead of
yes,
a united conversation with the decision makers. And that's kind of like I said, because I agree with you. There's Coca-Cola gives thousands of dollars of money to United Way. United Way does a whole bunch of great money, but they also have connections that I don't have as I like to call myself, a pracademic or an academic. I don't have those connections. They don't they have connections that you don't have when you make a phone call.
right, right,
We don't necessarily get answers or callbacks. They get immediate appointments or that type of thing. So I just think when there's more voices that are interested in helping the disabled population, and every time that I've come across it, every corporate organization that I've interviewed that I didn't start the conversation with, "Hey, can you give me money?"
hmm
Because I get that all the time. But when I said, "Hey,
right, right,
listen,
right,
how do you think your membership might be able to help my cause if I'm not looking for money? What is it that you do? And it's come to the point where there, in London, Ontario, one city here,
Hmm.
it's a number of materials that were being
Yeah.
discarded that could be repurposed
Hmm.
for the disabled community. That just it just they didn't put two and two together. You know, the source materials to make certain assisted devices that are very helpful to the disabled community were being tossed in the recycling bin by corporations that didn't know somebody else in the community might be able to repurpose this type of material. And even simple relationships like that don't have a monetary tagline to it can be successful.
I think you hit on a really good point. When approaching an organization like the Chamber of Commerce, yes, it is a singular organization uh, made up of all of the different businesses in the community, but you also have all of the individual members of the chamber. And what and while individually, they may not have a lot that they can contribute, but collectively, what have you got? What have you got? What can we do over here? And to at least start putting the idea in their head. One of the things that I've been talking to a lot of people about in my initial conversations, because at the moment, yes, we're always doing fundraising and stuff, and everybody would like to have someone throw a check at you. That would be wonderful.
Not going to say
But
no.
yeah, absolutely not. No, 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 no. But when you approach someone, when you approach an organization, that just as you mentioned, that door will be closed the moment you put your hand out. But my approach has been, I just want to tell you what's going on.
Yeah.
And I want to get you on my side so that you know what we're doing, or even that we exist and what point we are at now. And when I call upon you, will you be able to not throw money at me, but can we use your influence,
Yep.
your backing to get me through another door, to get me over another hurdle that we cannot get over by ourselves? And the Chamber of Commerce would be a perfect place to start with that. I agree with you.
And it's just starting to bring the different voices because you had
Right.
mentioned earlier about elderly community and the care
Hmm.
communities, and a lot of
Hmm.
us have relatives or family relatives who are in some type of assisted facility as they age through life. And
Sure.
then when a disaster or an emergency happens, we're like, where is the government? Like, why was this allowed to happen? Like the disaster that happened in the pandemic of all of the extra deaths because the lack of staff and protective processes and things within care homes. We don't like to be the devil's advocate. We said, well, why weren't you advocating for any of this prior to? And some of the responses to those questions have always been, what do you mean? I don't, who would I possibly talk to advocate for a higher level of oversight to care communities in my portion of New Hampshire? Like, who even
Hmm.
does that? And that's part of the conversation of getting, because when you talk about care homes, I guarantee
Yep.
you a good portion of the Chamber of Commerce have family members in care homes. And they're, when you bring the issue up, they're like, yeah,
Yes.
I I don't think they can get everybody out in the middle of the night when there's only three people on duty, right? And
No,
the
it's
issue, and you
right.
start to bring those issues up to people who are unaware, and you're saying, "Hey, I'm over here. I think this is important. This is an issue. I think we of enough importance that we should sit down with the decision makers in our local or state government to talk about it. And we'd
Right.
really love for your signature to be on a letter saying this is important to the Chamber of Commerce, or this is important to the Rotary Club, or this is important to United Way, or this is important to whatever the organization, and we start to see that advocacy grow, it increases the probability that we're going to get that conversation and bring it up
Right.
to light. And maybe we start changes within the industry itself by bringing this stuff forward. But it's about, like you said at the beginning of our conversation, it's about
Mhm.
people don't know you're there. People
Right,
don't know you're there
right.
advocating for what you are doing. And it's the same as marketing 101. I could have the best product to sell the world, but if the world has no idea I'm out there, then it
Hmm.
doesn't matter how good my product is. People have to know you're there. And the more and more
Right.
voices that are on your team, on Team Mark about helping the disabled population of New Hampshire be better prepared to navigate disasters. I just
Exactly.
and none of this costs money. It costs time, it costs your effort, it costs your time, but it doesn't actually require significant additional funding to start having
A
uh
conversation.
well, that's it, having conversations
Just
like
talk about it.
this, you know,
Just
like
talk
this to
about
bring
it.
it up.
That's all.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And that is another thing that I found. Everyone, um, my initial conversations were with people at the state level and the emergency management directors in the various regions, and they don't even know who to start the
No.
conversation with.
Yeah.
They're not taking the time to say, well, I know we should do this. How do we go about doing it? It's just another check mark, that's in on their to-do list. We need to, the emergency management plans all say that, we must include the disability community, but that's it. There's no how do you go about that. And I've always been with it's another old phrase to probably one of your grandmothers as well. Yeah, an ounce of prevention is worth
Oh,
a pound of cure. So
yeah.
if we can take this and get the conversations going, then we're going to save lives without even having to expend any funds to do it.
No. Yeah.
As long as everybody knows what's going on. You had mentioned care coordinators a little bit ago, and a good friend of mine has cerebral palsy. Uh, I've known him for about 5 years now, and he deals with Medicare quite a bit. And he's just gotten part of what they call it the ride here in Manchester, so that he can get around town on the bus and they come and pick him up. But I learned about care coordinators that are part of the Medicare system the just a week and a half ago, and this is they are people within Medicare that will help you coordinate all of that stuff. He had never heard of them,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he's been in the system for 50 years.
Yeah.
So they don't advertise this stuff. They don't tell you all of the things that they can do. So a lot of that self advocacy, needs to be brought forward too.
And self-advocacy is difficult to
Tough.
navigate. I mean,
It's tough.
you can even translate it to the veteran community.
Hmm.
The veterans, your VA, very similar to Veterans Affairs Canada, actually has a lot of really great programs,
Yes.
and can do a great detail to assist a veteran with physical and mental disabilities and challenges, and to help
Hmm.
to the greatest extent possible them navigate as close to normal life. The problem is point of entry
Right.
and what benefits are available. The simple question that we found here that are probably very similar across disabilities is, what am I entitled to? And
Yeah.
a simple thing like that, like this person not knowing that this ride program existed,
Hmm.
or not knowing that they needed one more
Okay.
piece of paper, for example, to qualify for the ride program. Um,
Right.
the fact that it's information management. We don't have a portal, and I deal regularly on the Veterans Affairs Canada portal, and I know friends in the U.S. military who deal with the VA in the very
Hmm.
same way. And
Right.
there isn't a put in all of my qualifications, my approved disabilities, where I live, my income, and it outputs the whole laundry list of things that you're entitled to. You have to have a really great case coordinator who says, okay, now you're over this threshold, we can get you into this program and then this program. And if we're unsuccessful, here's how we're going to appeal that decision. Right?
And what I'm finding is What I'm finding is that a lot of people are not being asked what they need.
Yeah. Yeah.
There, there is, as you say, an entire laundry list of benefits, of programs, of groups that are able to assist with virtually everything that you are going to need. But who do I ask for what I need? And who do
Yeah.
I say, I need this, I need that? Well, that's not ours. No, you have to go talk to this group over here.
Yeah.
No, I can't do bus rides. That belongs to the transit authority. I'm only the person that deals with your Meals on Wheels. I don't do that. So there is no coordination between any of the programs whatsoever, really.
And I really think it spans a great deal the number of the disabled community is that each individual program was created by out of the best of intentions to fill a very
Of course.
specific need that the population had.
Yes,
But the holistic need of the population, we don't look from the top down to the person as a whole instead of trying to piecemeal each individual need that they have.
right.
Exactly that. It's that conversation. And if we take it from the individual and we bring it up to the collective, who is asking the disability community right now as a community what they need from the government in times of crisis? Is that question even being asked?
It does not appear to be, no. A woman that I spoke with a couple of weeks ago she's the secretary, if you will, of the autism spectrum disorder group here in New Hampshire. And they have just started talking about emergency management and how to address all of that from within their own community. Not how do we deal with it on a state level like I've been dealing with, but how do we deal with that for ourselves? What are we going to need to do? And they're just starting asking those questions, though they've been around for a long time. So I think it's with everything that's been happening with the climate and with the political nature of everything nowadays. I think more and more people are talking about how do we deal with all of this stuff uh, without having to have the government involved, without
Yeah.
relying on them first,
Yeah.
uh, because it may be if there's something really bad that goes on, it could be 6, 8, 10 hours before someone from the government was able to get to you or to your neighbor. So what would you do until then?
And
Would you
that could be
just leave?
days. That could be a
Yeah.
day. And if you're in a rural
Mhm.
area, it could be upwards of a week, depending on roads trapped. I mean, I've seen snowfall in the mountains of New Hampshire.
Yeah.
It may be a week before they get to some of those communities. And just look at how
Yeah.
long it took to get to communities with the entire FEMA in North Carolina. And you
Right.
could just see the difficulty there. And when exactly that, when what is the expectation? And this is a great quote that I keep with permission reusing. Damon Coppola, who is he works for Shoreline Risk in the western coast of the United States. He's a textbook author and editor for emergency management. So
Okay.
very, very stalwart individual. And he has got a great phrase that in a resilient community, emergency management is the redundancy. It is the community that is the primary.
Right.
So it's about and what I'm advocating for is not that the government won't be there, not that the government is abandoning the population, but
Right.
if we didn't have the government, what is it that the community with the existing community resources could do to assist the marginalized populations who are going to be at a higher risk, exposed to a greater degree of risk in times of significant disruption? How do we do that? How do we organize that as a community to where, it's great if the state EM shows up, but what if the state
Oh,
EM
sure.
doesn't? Are we just
Well,
going to
he's
stand around and go, it's their fault and start pointing fingers? Or do we think the community owes a duty of care? And what I use to explain my logic, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is the food
Mhm.
bank.
Mhm.
Food banks are local, right?
Yes.
I donate
Yes.
to my food bank. so that the people in my small community, I live in a city of 1 million people, so my
Right.
little corner of the community, they're the only people who go to that food bank. So I
Right.
donate money to feed my neighbors when my neighbors can't eat. I don't need the government. I don't want the government. The community doesn't accept any government subsidies. The
Right.
community believes it's our responsibility to feed the people in our own community who can't eat. Food banks are probably the one part of the social safety net that still remains strongly in the hands of the community.
And
I
always will.
and it should. And I try to
Yeah.
use that as an example of when we're talking about the specific and special needs of the disabled community in emergency management, how much of that can be provided by the community.
I think most of it can be provided by the community, at least at the outset, until help is able to come along. And the first part of that is to know your community, get out in your community, talk to your neighbors, say hello to the person that you see on the street. When you live in large cities, everybody's got their head down, they have their face in their phones, and they're going about their daily lives.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
but
So true.
there are so many interactions throughout the day, just to say hello
Yeah.
and see where people are at, meeting these people where they're at, so that you know that someone is there, that you know that someone is going to need assistance. One of the things that we have been working on is the emergency management directors in all of the cities and towns are wonderful people. They're noble. They take their job very seriously, but they don't know where the disability community is.
No.
So, how do we prioritize any of that to get the help where it's going to be needed? I mentioned those towns that were cut off in New Hampshire last year, and the flooding that we have it had, and it wiped out several of the roads to get in and out of these towns. And it was weeks before they could actually get to any of the roads back up, so they could get trucks in and ambulances in. And the only thing that they were relying on were with people with ATVs going up through the woods to
Yeah.
get back in there. But nobody knew who was in there. Now, if we had the information where the emergency management directors knew that there are 10 people in there that need oxygen tanks, I've got 15 people that need insulin. We, uh, we don't know who's there, so you don't know who to help first.
Yep.
You can't prioritize anything until you can get that community together so that everybody in the community knows who's there, in until we can get the infrastructure in place so that they can at least let the first responders know who's there. You know, say I was outside of town when the road got washed away. Well, I would know, my neighbors on either side of me, so we could, alert the first responders. You're going to have to go find this person or that person, because there's no other method of communication. So I think getting the town, getting the community together, simply to set eyes on each other. Hey, we're here. We're all in, if something happens, I've got your back.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, another story that I like to tell is there's a project about, probably 8 years ago now in the Caribbean. And the Caribbean islands get periodically smoked by hurricanes. And
Mm-hmm.
the building codes and structures are not quite up to the standard you would
Mm-mm.
expect, right? But there is
Yeah.
also the realization in a lot of these more rural elements of some of the islands that we can't save every home. There never will be enough money to retrofit every home to the standard. And
Right.
so the question was, what do we do? And the answer to that was, we're going to retrofit the school. So there was a World Bank program, and they got some funding from the World Bank and from European Union to go in and build these massively robust local schools that weren't that big because the population wasn't that large, but they were
Right.
built to take a direct hit from a Category 5 hurricane. So what the population knew is that post event, without any communications, this is where we need to go. Because in there is going to be food, water, shelter, first aid, and communications with the outside world will all be readily available there. And this is how we go. But everybody was registered. So it's like your
Right.
old school days of the Catholic nuns standing there at the door, knowing everybody who was coming in and knew right away when Johnny was skipping school. That the
Yes.
community itself was aware that we're 12 hours post event and we haven't heard from Martha. And we
Right.
haven't seen Martha and nobody's seen Martha. Somebody's getting on that ATV and
To go
going to
find Martha.
and you're going to go find Martha without
Right.
any communications, without any wireless, with it was just what the community had built. They realized that what I would like to do is way up here, but we never have the funding for that. So how can I knock it out of the park with the smaller amount of funding that I do have? How can I make the biggest impact? So then what you never had, ideally, I mean, nothing ever works perfectly, but that you had a community that knew what to do. You had a community that knew what the government was going to do, knew what each expectation was. They were aware of people who were marginalized in their population who would need extra assistance. And they knew what that extra assistance was. Like you said, they had codified the need for insulin, special medication, climate controlled medication, CPAP
Mhm.
machines, oxygen, and everything else like that that had to be supported in their population. So, with the limited response capability, it was could be allocated to the right place. But you're right. I think the number one, and I say this all the time in preparedness, the number
Mhm.
one thing you can do to be prepared for a disaster is meet your neighbor. It's free of charge, and it's the number one thing you can do because we can look at statistics all the way back 300 years ago in Japan. Who's pulling you out of an earthquake? It's not first responders. It's not
The guy next door.
firefighters. It's the guy next door. Who's
Right.
banging on your door at 2 in the morning because there's smoke pouring out of the roof? It's not the fire department. It's your neighbor. Who's
Right.
going to bring a hot meal over to your door when you've had a significant incident in your family? It's
Right.
not going to be Meals on Wheels. It's going to be your neighbor who's going to put that meal on your doorstep or drop off that box of now that they know you, box of diapers when the new baby arrives. That, that kind of community spirit only happens when we know each other. And I really don't think in our modern disconnected phone driven societies, we don't spend much time chatting in 3D.
No, we don't. Seeing people in real life can be scary. Now, now,
It's so
yeah,
abnormal.
well, it is. It is. I've spoken to so many people, and then I will go to a conference and I will see someone in real life. It's like, oh my God, you're a real person. This is so exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You forget that three-dimensional people, actually exist instead of just a two-dimensional Zoom meeting. But yeah, I completely agree with you that one of the aspects of calling the organization the whole community is because the community is everybody.
Yeah.
It is the whole community. And, getting to understand who is in that community and how best to serve them, until help can come. And, is going to be incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we do. Be a good neighbor, say hello. Um, you know,
And
I, those old welcome wagon days are long gone, I know, but yes, I'm old enough to remember
but that
welcome
used to be a real
wagons.
thing. You'd sign up
I
for it
know,
as soon as, and then
I know.
everybody would walk you through. But I think, and the last thing we'll talk about before we close this out is one thing that I think we need to do more of championing is championing the assets of the disabled community. And what I mean by that is, that mobility challenged individual across the hall from you may very well be a mechanical engineer. And
Yeah,
they bring
yeah,
an incredible value to the community, an
right,
incredible gift. They just
right,
have a shortfall of maybe not being that mobile or
right.
being a little bit more frail in certain weather or whatever their disability may be. Far too often, I find the conversation is all the extra needs of the disability community, vice what is the real cool stuff? What are the great benefits that they bring to the community? Because we make lists when we do of the
Yep.
needs of the disability community, but rarely do we make the other list
The
saying
assets of them.
the assets of the
Hmm.
disability community and what
Hmm.
they can bring. Because when you look at somebody who's 65 years old and has had cerebral palsy their whole life and has survived a professional career, if you want to look at somebody who understands what it's like to navigate chaos, disruption, and uncertainty, I think you've got a pretty good asset there versus
Right.
somebody who's had a nice, comfy silver spoon life and probably never missed a paycheck in their entire day, right? So
Or a meal. Yeah.
or a meal. So I just your thoughts on that idea of maybe also concentrating on the assets and the benefit of the disability community.
Well, I think too often the disability community is seen as just single dimensions. If you see a disabled person out in public, generally they're either ignored, or if you're with them, there's they're talking to the able-bodied person and not the disabled person. And 99 times out of 100, the disabled person is only disabled because they're living in this abled world. So the world has technically made them disabled because they can't get into the store. They may be need to use a wheelchair, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to be an expert on Excel or a brilliant architect. There's a gentleman that I spoke to a couple of weeks ago. He's 70 something now, has had cerebral palsy all of his life. He's nonverbal, is in a wheelchair, so everything that he does, he has to type. But he is such a good architect. He's retrofitting buildings all over town
Yeah.
that are just the most amazing structures you ever want to see.
Yeah.
So without, I was just thinking, like if I was going to look for a job, I would send them my resume. These are my qualifications, these are my strengths, these are what I can do to help this job. Nobody asks that, the disabled community.
No, they
It's
don't.
just, what are you going to need? Oh, yeah, no, that's too bad. You need to be on oxygen 24 hours a day. That doesn't mean that they're not capable of taking care of themselves. They just need oxygen.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they're not capable of being the best banker or the best insurance agent or even the best mechanic you ever want to meet. So it gets left by the wayside. The only way that that's going to happen is by talking,
And
having
that is
conversations just like this.
and it is so true. And I think we will end it there on the idea that as we started at the beginning, that this really begins and only continues when we learn to have a conversation with all elements and all contribution sources within our community. In other words,
Yes.
creating a roundtable where we get everybody around. And as your first point stated right at the beginning is, you're after a seat at the table. You're after a voice in the conversation. And I think
Yes.
if we set the conditions where more voices get there, all of the voices get there, especially and arguably the voices who don't really think they have a role, but have a great deal to contribute. And I think we'll do a wonderful job of moving these ideas forward and at least having a far more informed conversation.
We're going to do our best, Jeff. We're going to do our best. That's the goal. And I know it's not something that's going to be solved by summer, and that's fine. Like a lot of other organizations, we're here for the long haul, and this conversation is just beginning, but we're going to keep expanding on it and bring it to as many people as possible, so that we can have as much information as possible, so that everybody is able to uh, uh, help everybody else. and keep the whole community safe and responsible and happy with each other.
That's perfect, Mark. Thank you very much for joining us, and have yourself a great day.
You too, sir. Thank you. Wonderful speaking with you. Talk to you soon.